AITA for refusing to cover my coworker's shifts after she called me lazy for not having kids? Working full-time in retail is no joke. Between the rotating shifts, the never-ending stream of customers, and the constant work of stocking, it's the kind of job that leaves you exhausted at the end of every day. But I've been doing it for years, and I actually like the work. Sure, there are the days when a customer's impossible to please or when the holiday rush makes it feel like everyone's taken leave of their senses. But it's steady. The people I work with are generally friendly, and there's a certain satisfaction in doing a job that keeps me on my toes. At 28, I'm one of the younger employees at my store, which sometimes feels like an advantage and sometimes doesn't. People assume that since I'm in my 20s and don't have kids, I must have a ton of free time and no real responsibilities. But the truth is, I have a pretty busy life outside of work. Between maintaining my apartment, trying to keep up with my hobbies, and spending time with friends and family, I keep a pretty full schedule. Even if it's just running errands, my time is my own, and it's important to me. One of my coworkers, Sarah, is in her early 30s and has been at the store for a few years longer than I have. She's got 2 young kids, both in grade school, and they're her entire world. She's got this kind, nurturing energy about her, the type you'd expect from someone who's juggling work and motherhood. When I first met her, I respected how much she seemed to handle, raising 2 kids, working full-time, and still finding the energy to be cheerful at work. And because of that respect, I've always tried to help her out when I could. Over the past year, Sarah has occasionally asked me to cover her shifts. Sometimes it's a last-minute kid emergency, like a sick day or an unexpected school issue. And other times it's planned, like a school event or appointment. I've always been more than willing to help out. After all, life happens, and I've always thought it's good to support each other when we can. However, as time went on, I started noticing that I seemed to be the one Sarah asked most frequently. I wasn't the only person in the store without kids. Several of us are either child-free or have grown kids, but somehow, I seemed to be her go-to for coverage. At first, I didn't think much of it, figuring it was just coincidence. I like to be a team player, and I know that being a mom can't be easy. But after a while, I began to wonder if she was taking advantage of my willingness to help. One day, after covering for Sarah on her 3rd missed shift that month, I mentioned it to another coworker, Jess. She's a couple of years older than me and has been with the store for ages. Jess raised her eyebrows and gave me a knowing look. "She's got you pegged, girl," Jess said with a small laugh. "Sarah knows you'll cover for her. She barely ever asks me or Marcy to switch with her." I was a little taken aback. Really? I just thought, since she's got kids and everything, she's got more going on. Jess shrugged. "Sure, but just because she's got kids doesn't mean the rest of us aren't busy too. It's fine to help out, but don't let her guilt you into doing it every time." Her words lingered with me over the next few weeks. I thought about how often I'd rearranged my own plans to help Sarah out and started wondering if maybe I'd been a little too accommodating. It wasn't that I minded helping, but after hearing Jess's perspective, I felt like I was starting to see things in a new light. Just because I didn't have kids didn't mean my time was somehow less valuable. I had my own life, my own responsibilities, and they mattered too. Things reached a breaking point last week. Sarah approached me during a lull in the shift, looking flustered and a little frantic. I already had a feeling about what she was going to ask before she even said it. "Hey, do you think you could cover for me on Saturday?" she asked. Looking hopeful. "My son has a school event, and I promised him I'd be there." I hesitated. Normally, I would have agreed right away. But this time, I had plans with my sister. We hadn't had a proper day together in ages, and I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I explained that I already had plans and wouldn't be able to help this time. Sarah let out a sigh that was just a little too heavy. Like she was trying to make a point. "Must be nice to have all that free time," she said, her tone slightly dismissive. "You don't have kids, so it's not like you're busy with anything important." I froze, feeling a mix of shock and hurt. I'd never thought she felt that way. That she actually assumed I didn't have important things in my life just because I didn't have children. I'd always thought I was helping out of kindness. that she appreciated the gesture. But hearing her say that, it was like she was brushing aside everything in my life as insignificant compared to hers. Just because I don't have kids doesn't mean I don't have a life, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My time is important too. She rolled her eyes, a faint smirk playing on her lips, as if she didn't believe me. Without another word, she walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling angry and dismissed. The rest of my shift was uncomfortable. I replayed the conversation over and over in my mind, growing more and more frustrated each time. Here I was, constantly rearranging my life to help her out, and she had the nerve to act like my time wasn't worth respecting. I'd done her favors out of kindness, and she'd repaid me by making me feel like less of a person because I didn't have the same responsibilities she did. It felt wrong, unfair, and deeply hurtful. Over the next few days, things got even worse. I started noticing that some of my other coworkers were acting differently around me. More distant and reserved. I'd walk into the break room, and conversations would stop abruptly, or I'd catch people exchanging glances. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe I was imagining things. But one day, I overheard something that confirmed my suspicions. I was walking back from my lunch break when I heard two coworkers talking in low voices by the stockroom. They hadn't noticed me approach, and I caught a bit of their conversation. "She's got it easy. No wonder she doesn't get it," one of them said, sounding annoyed. The other one murmured something in agreement, and I felt a sharp pang of hurt. They were talking about me, assuming that because I didn't have kids, my life was somehow easier. That I couldn't understand what it was like to have real responsibilities. It was like they'd reduced my entire existence to this one thing. And no matter what else I did, I was less deserving of respect because I didn't have a family to care for. That evening, as I sat at home, I found myself replaying the events of the past few days, feeling a growing sense of anger and frustration. I'd always tried to be kind, to help out where I could, and to be a team player. But now it felt like all of that had been thrown back in my face. Like my life and my time were nothing more than a joke to them. The thought of going back to work and facing Sarah's judgment and the silent reproach of my other coworkers made me feel sick. The next day, I decided to talk to my manager. I didn't want to make a huge deal out of it, but I felt like someone needed to know what was going on. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, hoping for a little understanding. But to my disappointment, my manager just shrugged it off. "It sounds like a personal conflict," he said, his tone indifferent. "I don't want to get involved in anything that doesn't directly affect the work." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here I was, feeling completely isolated and humiliated at work, and he was just brushing it off as if it didn't matter. I walked out of his office feeling even more alone than before, wondering if I was somehow the problem. Maybe I'd been wrong to say no to Sarah. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should just suck it up and keep helping her out. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew that my time was valuable, and I deserved respect just as much as anyone else, with or without kids. And I decided then and there that I was done being taken for granted. From now on, if Sarah wanted a favor, she was going to have to look somewhere else. The day after my talk with my manager, I felt a new sense of determination. I'd spent enough time bending over backward to help Sarah, and it was clear now that she wasn't going to appreciate it or respect my time. If my manager didn't want to get involved, I'd have to handle this on my own. For the first time in months, I told myself that I was allowed to say no without feeling guilty about it. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, I was finishing up some stock work when Sarah approached me, wearing her usual look of forced politeness. She started with some small talk, her tone overly casual, and then cut to the chase. "Hey, can you cover for me tomorrow? My daughter has a recital, and I really don't want to miss it," she said, clasping her hands together in a way that made it clear she expected a yes. It was tempting to give in, but I'd promised myself that things were going to change. So, I took a deep breath and met her gaze. "I'm sorry, but I can't," I said simply. Her smile faded, replaced by a slight frown. "Why not?" I didn't owe her an explanation, but I decided to keep it straightforward. I have plans tomorrow, I replied, keeping my voice calm and even. She let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head. Must be nice to have the freedom to make plans whenever you want. I don't have that luxury. You'd think you could help out once in a while. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. I've helped you out plenty of times, Sarah, I said, my tone firmer than usual. But I have my own life, too, and I can't always rearrange it at the last minute. She gave me a look of pure disbelief, as if she couldn't believe I'd actually said no. Wow, I didn't realize you were so selfish. With that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling a strange mixture of anger and relief. For the first time, I'd put my foot down. And even though her reaction hurt, I knew I'd made the right decision. My time was valuable, whether she wanted to acknowledge it or not. The fallout was almost immediate. Over the next few days, Sarah made it her mission to let everyone know what had happened. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere whenever I walked into the break room or passed by a group of coworkers. People who'd once been friendly and chatty suddenly seemed distant, and I could see the judgment in their eyes. They were taking her side, assuming I was the bad guy without ever bothering to ask for my perspective. One afternoon, I overheard a couple of coworkers talking about me. They didn't know I was nearby, and I caught one of them saying, "She just doesn't get it. If she had kids, she'd understand that sometimes you need a little help. It's not like her life is that hard." I felt my face flush with anger. They didn't know anything about my life, but they'd made assumptions based on one factor alone: the fact that I didn't have kids. It was like my entire worth as a person was being measured by whether or not I had children. And since I didn't, my life was apparently easy, and my time was free. It was beyond frustrating, but I reminded myself of the boundary I'd set. I couldn't control what other people thought, but I could control how I reacted. So, I kept my head down and focused on my work, doing my best to ignore the whispers and the judgmental looks. But it wasn't easy. Each day felt like a struggle, and I found myself dreading going to work more and more. The worst part was that I could feel myself starting to doubt my own decisions. Maybe my coworkers were right. Maybe I was being selfish for not helping Sarah. Maybe, by saying no, I was failing to understand the challenges she faced as a mother. But every time I felt that pang of guilt, I reminded myself of all the times I'd already helped her. All the times I'd rearranged my plans and put her needs above my own. It wasn't selfish to want a life of my own, it was fair. One evening after work, as I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of everything hit me hard. I felt isolated, judged, and misunderstood, all because I decided to stand up for myself. I hadn't expected things to get so tense, and I couldn't help but wonder if I should have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew that this was a lesson in boundaries, in learning to value my own time and needs just as much as anyone else's. Just as I was lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jess, the coworker who'd hinted early on that Sarah was taking advantage of me. She'd been one of the few people who hadn't distanced herself from me. And seeing her name brought a small spark of hope. "Hey, can we talk?" her message read. I replied immediately, and we arranged to meet up for coffee the next day. Sitting across from Jess in a quiet cafe, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was facing this situation alone. Jess didn't beat around the bush. "I heard about what's been going on with Sarah," she said, giving me a sympathetic look. "And I just wanted to let you know that I think you did the right thing. She's been taking advantage of you for a while, and it's about time someone said no." Her words were like a balm to my wounded pride. "Thanks, Jess." I was starting to feel like I was the only one who saw it that way. She nodded, looking a little sad. "You're not. A lot of people see it, but they don't say anything because they don't want to be labeled as unsympathetic or selfish. And Sarah, well, she's good at making people feel guilty." Hearing this made me feel even more validated. I wasn't crazy. Other people could see what was happening, even if they weren't willing to speak up. Jess and I talked for a while, and she shared some of her own experiences with setting boundaries at work, telling me about times when she'd had to stand up for herself even when it wasn't popular. By the time we left the cafe, I felt more at peace, knowing that I wasn't alone in this struggle. In the following weeks, I continued to stand firm in my boundaries. Sarah tried a couple more times to get me to cover her shifts, each time hinting that I was being unhelpful or uncooperative. But I didn't let it get to me. I simply repeated that I had plans or that I couldn't help this time. Each time I said no, I felt a little stronger, a little more confident in my right to protect my own time and energy. Gradually, the whispers and judgmental glances from my coworkers began to fade. Some of them seemed to realize that I wasn't going to back down, and others lost interest once the drama died down. Jess remained a steady source of support, and a few other coworkers who'd once been distant started warming up again, either out of genuine understanding or simple pragmatism. Either way, I appreciated the shift, feeling like things were finally returning to normal. But the experience had changed me. I no longer felt like the eager-to-please coworker who would drop everything to help out at a moment's notice. I'd learned a valuable lesson about boundaries and self-respect, one that I knew would stick with me long after this situation had faded into memory. My time was valuable, my needs were valid, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel otherwise. One afternoon, as I was finishing my shift, Sarah approached me again. This time, her tone was different, less entitled, more cautious. "Hey," she began, her voice a little softer than usual. "I know things have been tense lately, and I wanted to say I'm sorry if I came off too harsh. I guess I just assumed you'd be willing to help because you didn't have the same obligations as me." I looked at her, surprised but grateful for the apology. "Thank you, Sarah. I understand that being a mom is hard, and I don't mind helping out when I can. But I need you to understand that my time is important, too." She nodded, looking genuinely contrite. "I get it. I guess I just didn't think about it that way before. Thanks for being honest with me." We parted on a more positive note than we had in weeks, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough. I'd stood up for myself. I'd set a boundary, and in the end, I'd managed to earn a little more respect, not just from Sarah, but from myself. Over the next few weeks, work felt different, both better and more complicated. On one hand, standing my ground with Sarah was empowering. I no longer felt like I had to rearrange my life to accommodate someone else's needs constantly. I could plan my own time and honor those plans, guilt-free. On the other hand, I could tell that not everyone understood my choice. Some coworkers still seemed a little distant, but most of them had either moved on or stopped caring. Sarah's apology had been sincere, and while it didn't erase the past, it felt like a step toward a healthier dynamic. She no longer asked me to cover for her every time something came up. And when she did, there was a new respect in her tone, a simple request rather than an expectation. It felt like she'd finally understood that I wasn't there to be at her constant disposal. If I did say yes, it was a choice, not an obligation. Jess continued to be supportive, and as the tension with Sarah faded, I noticed other coworkers starting to come around too. One afternoon, I was restocking some shelves with Anna, one of my colleagues who had kept her distance during the whole ordeal. She'd been friendly before, but as things with Sarah had escalated, she'd turned a bit cold. I was surprised when she struck up a conversation. "Hey, I wanted to say sorry if I came off judgmental or anything," she said, glancing at me with an apologetic smile. "I know I probably wasn't the friendliest lately." I looked over, feeling a mix of surprise and relief. "Thanks, Anna. I wasn't sure how people felt, to be honest." She nodded, letting out a sigh. "It's just, well, Sarah's got her own set of challenges, and I think a lot of us just assumed you'd keep helping because you were always so willing." But after hearing her side of things, I realized I never even thought about how it must have felt for you to be expected to help all the time. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I get it. I know being a mom is hard, and I don't mind helping when I can. But I've got a life too. You know, sometimes it feels like people forget that just because I don't have kids." Anna nodded, seeming genuinely thoughtful. "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry for assuming. It's easy to take things for granted, especially when someone's as nice as you are. But it's not fair, and I'm glad you stood up for yourself." We finished the rest of the shift chatting about random things, new shows, favorite recipes, weekend plans. It felt like a return to normalcy. And I was grateful for it. I'd been afraid that setting boundaries would make me an outcast. That people would see me as selfish or lazy, as Sarah had put it. But instead, I'd gained a new respect from those around me. And, more importantly, I'd gained respect for myself. A few days later, I was helping a customer when I noticed Sarah nearby, chatting with one of the newer hires, a college student named Riley. Riley was young, bright-eyed, and eager to make a good impression. Watching her interact with Sarah, I saw a bit of my younger self in her, the willingness to help, the eagerness to please, the desire to fit in. As I observed from a distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah might try the same pattern with Riley, gradually expecting more and more help without reciprocation. After the customer left, I took a moment to walk over and introduce myself to Riley. We chatted for a few minutes, and I offered to show her a few tips and tricks around the store. She seemed appreciative, and I found myself feeling protective, wanting to make sure she knew her own worth from the start. Listen, I know you're new and probably feel like you have to say yes to everything. But don't let anyone make you feel like you have to drop everything for them, I said, trying to keep my tone light but sincere. Your time's valuable, too. Riley gave me a curious look, nodding slowly. Thanks for saying that. It can be hard to remember that sometimes. We continued talking, and I could see that she was listening. I hoped my words would make a difference for her, that she wouldn't feel pressured into overextending herself just to be liked or respected. If I could help her avoid the same mistake I'd made, it would be worth it. As the months went by, I noticed a change in myself, in how I carried myself at work. I felt more confident, more assertive. I'd stopped feeling the need to explain my every decision or apologize for setting boundaries. And as I grew more comfortable in my own skin, I noticed something surprising. My coworkers started seeking me out for advice or support. People who once might have dismissed me as the nice one who always helps out, now saw me as someone they could trust. Someone who wasn't afraid to speak up. Sarah, too, seemed to have come to terms with the new dynamic. We were cordial, even friendly at times, and while she occasionally asked for help, she respected my answer, whether it was yes or no. There were no more comments about how easy my life must be or how lucky I was. It was a relief, and I felt like I'd finally struck a balance. One evening, as I was closing up the store, Jess stopped by to chat. She'd been my biggest supporter through everything, and I was grateful for her friendship. You know, I'm proud of you, she said, smiling. It's not easy to stand up to people, especially when it feels like everyone else is judging you for it. I shrugged, feeling a bit sheepish. I just got tired of feeling like I wasn't allowed to have my own life. It's exhausting trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. She nodded knowingly. Trust me, I get it. It took me years to figure out that I don't have to justify my choices to anyone. But you did it. And people respect you for it. You've shown them that it's okay to set boundaries. That it's okay to put yourself first. Her words stayed with me as I walked home that night. I realized that the experience had taught me so much more than just how to say no. It had shown me the importance of respecting my own time, of recognizing my own worth, of valuing my own needs. I'd learned that I didn't have to justify my choices to anyone. That I was allowed to make decisions based on what felt right for me. And in the end, the journey had been worth it. I'd gained not only the respect of my coworkers but also a deeper understanding of myself. I'd learned that true strength comes from within, that it's rooted in self-respect and self-worth. I knew now that I could face whatever challenges came my way with confidence and resilience. As I stood at my apartment window that evening, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I'd come a long way from the person who used to say yes to everything. Who used to believe that my time was somehow less valuable than others. I was proud of the person I'd become, and I knew that I'd carry these lessons with me for the rest of my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with who I was. And as I looked out into the night, I knew that, no matter what came next, I was ready to face it, stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than ever before.